welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at gods5minutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. Genesis 12:1. The Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. With the reading of these verses, we stand at the spring, which becomes a little brook, which in turn becomes a broad Mississippi. A child can step across a little stream, but the mighty downriver flow will reflect the sky and water the continent. The call to Abram is one of the most significant events in the history of the world, while at the same time it is an eminent example of individual faith. Scriptures style Abram as the father of the faithful for both these reasons. For today, let's think of Abram's call in the personal sense. The first part of the divine command called for the patriarch to separate himself from practically everything he'd ever known. Country, family, benefits of inheritance. It's the ancient pattern. God's servants must be separated from home and kindred. There was no mere arbitrary test of obedience. God could not have done with Abram what he meant to unless he were by himself. So Isaiah wrote of him, I called him alone. Jesus told us, He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. The command God gave Abram was deliberately vague. He did not know whither he went. He was not told Canaan was his destination until he actually stood there. That's how we're all sent out. God has a way of showing us the lofty mountain peaks and the next step we are to take, but we must start and pursue our Christian journey without knowing all the crooked ravines and rocky ridges that lie between where we are today and our final destination. If we go out as He bids us, He'll show us what to do next. The promised reward for obedience would be a thin diet for a worldly appetite. To be the ancestor of a great nation, to be a blessing, to have one's name made great. What was there in these to fascinate a person unless he had a faith to teach him the relative importance of the earthly and the heavenly? Notice that the whole promise appeals to unselfish desires. It is always in some measure elevating to live for the future, but if it is only the same kind of good as the present would yield, is not much. The only really ennobling faith is one which sets before itself a future full of divine blessing and of diffusion of that blessing through us, and which therefore scorns delights, and for such gifts is content to be solitary and a wanderer. In Abram's response to the divine commandment, we have a wonderful example of prompt, unquestioning obedience to a bare word. We don't know how the divine command was given to Abram. We simply read the Lord said. We don't read of a burning bush or some other vision. By contrast, a few verses down we read the Lord appeared and said, which makes it seem that there was no outward sign of the divine will. The patriarch knew that he was following a divine command and not his own purpose, but all he seems to have had to confirm this message was the inward voice. He stands then on a high level, setting the example of faith as unconditional acceptance of and obedience to God's bare word. Faith is reliance on a person, and therefore trust in His word. That faith finds assurance in the promise given, but it can't stop there. It must also pass into obedience to the word of command. We can't cut faith in half, claim God's promises without obeying His laws. To pretend to claim and delight in God's promises without obeying laws is no faith at all. Whoever takes God at His word will take all His words. The separation between Abram and his father's house already existed when the Lord spoke to him, for they were idolaters while he worshipped one God. That drove them farther apart when the distance between Shechem and Haran. When sympathy in religion was at an end, the breach of all other ties was best. Well, friend, it's always that way. May the Lord give us faith in Him. And have you talked to Him today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at godsfiveminutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.